Hi everyone, my name's Ross and I'm a data scientist at Game Oracle. Today I want to talk to you about wishlists. Now I promise you this is not going to be another one of those you need 7,000 wishlists to succeed at game dev. What I want to talk to you today about is the wishlist to sales ratio and then talk about some of the outliers whose number of sales greatly exceeded their number of wishlists. So in this video, we're going to talk about the wishlist to sales ratio, which is simply the number of units sold divided by the number of wishlists. One quick caveat is the number of units sold and the number of wishlists is simply estimated. No one other than the developer and Steam knows the true number of units sold. This is something that we have to estimate using the number of reviews and the number of followers. And most people, including us in this space, estimate the number of units sold and the number of wish lists by using something called the Boxleiter Estimate. We've got a blog that explains all of this in detail, but in short, you take something like reviews or followers and you multiply it by an estimated multiplier. The multiplier is calculated using things like genre and ratings and release year. Basically, it's a back of the envelope kind of way of estimating the number of units sold or the number of wish lists. There was some leaked data in 2018 that showed these Boxleiter estimates were actually quite good at estimating the number of units sold, but it's still an estimate at the end of the day, so be cautious. So the general consensus online is that after the first week, the wishlist to sales ratio is about 20%, and previous analysis has shown that the biggest impact on the wishlist to sales ratio, unsurprisingly, is bad reviews. Second to that, which might surprise some people, is early access. I guess there's some players who just don't want to purchase a game while it's under active development. But we were curious about what kind of variation there is in wishlist to sales ratio and whether our Steam map could uncover some of those ratios and see any differences between types of games. So we decided to dive into our own data. Now if you're new to our channel, first, hello, but you might also not be aware that we've made a whole map of the Steam marketplace, and you can learn more about it in the video that we've linked here. So for our wishlist analysis, we collected data on about 10,000 games over a 10-month period, and for each of these games we collected how many wishlists they had at launch, and then how many units did they sell after about 1 week, and then after about 1 month. So here's what we saw for wishlist to sales ratios 1 week after release and 1 month after release. As you can see, there's not much difference between the two. So to simplify things, we just focused on the first month after release. So the first big difference that we saw in our data was a much lower wishlist to sales ratio with an average of about 0.1. Now one big caveat here is that we piled early access and full releases in together, so that probably explains quite a big difference that we see here. The reason we did this is because we wanted to simplify the analysis, and it's already been shown that early access can impact the wishlist to sales ratio. We really just wanted to focus on what differs between different types of games. There's also a small percentage of games that we're going to call unicorns that manage to outsell the number of wishlists quite dramatically. We're going to come back to these later. But for now, let's turn our attention to something that gets talked about online quite a lot, about how many wishlists you need, because there's this number that gets thrown around of 7,000 or about 7,000 to 10,000 wishlists, and we wanted to take a look at that. We wondered whether this number was applicable to everyone. So here let's look at the number of wishlists at launch versus the estimated number of sales after that first month. Although you can see a clear correlation, which to be honest shouldn't be surprising, more wishlists is of course a better thing, there is a lot of variation, especially as you get below 10,000 wishlists at launch. Now certainly above 10,000 wishlists at launch, fantastic. Estimated number of sales seems to be quite high. But for the majority there is still a lot of variation, even for those below 10,000 wishlists. But it should really be no shock that one of the biggest factors that explains this variation is simply the quality of the game. Bad reviews impact the wishlist to sales ratio, because no matter how many wishlists you have and no matter your marketing strategy, if the game is not fun, it will not sell. But the other variation is the games themselves. We're talking about art here. How can you compare a first-person shooter to a deep visual novel? It's just not the same thing. So using our Steam map, we separated the Steam marketplace into market segments. We did this as well in a previous piece of analysis, but basically we group games into buckets of very similar games based on their descriptions and their artwork. We then calculated the median wishlist-to-sales ratio in the first month for these games in each one of these market segments, and that's shown as this distribution here. So what you can see is that although most market segments, yes, do sit around that average of just above 0.1, there is still quite a lot of variation. Basically, what this graph shows is, although on average we see a wishlist-to-sales ratio of around 10%, it does really vary based on the type of game you make. So you should really be comparing yourself to other games in the same genre when talking about wishlists. And I'll just touch on this generally, but market segments that appeared to have a slightly lower ratio were things like pixel art RPGs, political simulators, and certain adult-themed content. I don't know if certain NSFW market segments get fewer reviews, and therefore our estimates are wrong, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Anyway, the segments that saw slightly higher ratios were things like cozy, idle puzzle games, some segments of psychological horrors, and interestingly, fast-paced arcade Bomberman-like mechanics. So what does this all mean if you're coming up to launching your game and you haven't hit that golden number of 7,000 to 10,000 wishlists? Our analysis highlights some important outliers that managed to sell a lot more units than they had wishlists, and we think we can learn a lot about game design but also marketing from these titles. So instead of praying to the Steam algorithm and marketing gods, these developers put a lot of time and effort into how they marketed and how they designed their game in such a way that it would be successful even if they didn't have the wishlist that they needed. The first of those outliers is Nubby's Number Factory. With an estimated 1,500 wishlists on launch, it went on to sell almost over 200,000 copies within its first month. The developer built the game in a way that it just naturally has these short, high energy clips of gameplay that are just perfect for TikTok, and that TikTok focused strategy drives sales far beyond the number of wishlists it initially had. Another example of a fantastically crafted game is Metal Garden. Although it only had 200 wishlists at launch, it managed to gain 7,700 estimated units sold within the first month. And this is largely down to the developer's commitment and outreach to influencers. This led to organic growth that drove the game to success. Remember how I mentioned that casual, idle, cozy games had a higher wishlist-to-sales ratio on average than other market segments? Well, there's two games in that genre that did exceptionally well considering the wishlist they had at launch. Mini Cozy Room Lo-Fi had an estimated 1,700 wishlists at around launch, but went on to sell possibly 13,000 units in its first month. And we estimate that Ropuka's Idle Island might have had around 3,000 wishlists on launch, but possibly went on to sell around 40,000 units in their first month. The developers behind both of these games really committed to marketing. They put out press releases and they got good media coverage, but they also engaged in their community and they've really shown that they understood their audience. The last outlier I'm going to talk about today is Digseum. It only had an estimated 100 wishlists at launch, but within its first month it might have sold around 76,000 copies. This game is perfect for influencers because it offers perfect gameplay for content, and that's exactly what happened. Digseum was picked up by some popular streamers on YouTube and it just exploded. Digseum is an example of how streamers and YouTube can make all the difference if the wishlist numbers are not there. So to summarise, wishlists are really important, but they're not as important as the quality of your game and the quality of your marketing approach. So we really hope you've enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you have, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want to stay up to date and see more videos like this.